There are movie scenes. And then there are moments, the kind that freeze an entire cinema audience in their seats, make jaws drop, and get people talking for 30 years straight. Jamie Lee Curtis in True Lies is one of those moments. But here's what most people still don't know. That scene almost never happened the way you saw it. In fact, it almost didn't happen at all. The original plan was completely different. The song choice was a last-minute decision. There was zero choreography. And the moment that had audiences losing their minds? That was engineered with surgical precision to make you feel exactly the way you felt. And the dance? That's just the beginning of what we're unpacking today. Because behind True Lies sits one of the most jaw-dropping production stories in Hollywood history, near-death accidents. A director who rewrote the entire comedy of the film himself, a child actress who came forward with serious allegations years later, and a sequel that was ready to shoot until the world changed overnight. Buckle up. This goes deeper than you think. Let's talk about it. The scene. That scene. Helen Tasker, bored housewife, overlooked wife of a seemingly dull computer salesman, finds herself in a dimly lit hotel room, asked to perform a striptease for a mysterious stranger. What she doesn't know is that the stranger of the shadows is her own husband, Harry, who has used the full resources of a covert spy agency to put her in this exact situation. It's equal parts twisted, funny, and oddly romantic. And it works entirely because of what Jamie Lee Curtis brought to it. Here's what most people think happened. Curtis rehearsed an iconic choreographed striptease, delivered it flawlessly, and Hollywood magic did the rest. Here's what actually happened. There was no choreographer, no rehearsal. Director James Cameron simply turned to Curtis and asked, "What do you want to dance to?" Curtis, drawing from her own personal taste, chose a track from John Hyatt's Bring the Family album, a song called Alone in the Dark with what she described as a funky, irresistible rhythm. She later said she danced the same way she does when she's home alone. That's the entire foundation of one of the most talked about scenes in 1990s cinema. But the real secret? That fall you see, the moment Helen grabs the bedpost, loses her footing, and tumbles to the floor, is not an accident. It's not a blooper. It was engineered. Curtis rehearsed the scene extensively with Cameron, and it was during those rehearsals that a fall was conceived. It didn't happen spontaneously. It was carefully planned. Cameron's thinking was specific and deliberate. He told Curtis the dance was getting too real, too good, and that he needed to break the spell of what the husband had put his wife through. It's a comedy, and he knew it, and Schwarzenegger's reaction. That split second where Harry jolts upright in alarm before catching himself? Arnold was never told about the fall beforehand. That reaction is completely genuine. They tried a second take, but his response didn't look anywhere near as natural. Point one take. That's all they needed. Now here's the detail that will genuinely surprise you. The original vision for the scene had Helen going completely nude, filmed in darkness, so only her silhouette would be visible. It was Curtis herself who suggested doing it in full light, in her own underwear. She demonstrated it for Cameron during pre-production, who later said it reminded him exactly why he loved his job. And the lingerie? The bra and matching panties worn in the scene were Jamie Lee Curtis's own. The scene drew criticism from some quarters for being exploitative. Cameron pushed back directly on that, noting that most of the criticism came from men, while female reviewers largely praised it as empowering and even liberating for the character of Helen. Curtis had full creative input, full control, and she owned every frame of it. The result? Curtis has said the laugh from the fall is still the single biggest laugh she has ever received in any of her films. 30 years later, that moment still lands. The dance scene grabs the headlines, but the production of True Lies was genuinely, repeatedly, dangerous in ways that go far beyond what ended up on screen. Start with Jamie Lee Curtis and a helicopter. In one of the film's centerpiece action sequences, Helen Tasker is ripped from a speeding limousine midair by her husband hanging from a helicopter. The wide shot used a stunt woman, Donna Keegan, and getting even that right was a nightmare. Cameron was shooting from a helicopter with limited sight lines as the car moved below. At the very last second, everything aligned. Cameron called it one and done. But Curtis wasn't done. She then strapped herself into the rig to shoot her close-up reaction shots, dangling from a helicopter herself. When asked where Cameron would be during her portion, He told her he'd be hanging out of the helicopter door, filming her with a handheld camera. Her only condition for the entire sequence was that someone on the helicopter carry wire cutters, in case they had to ditch over water, and she needed to be separated from the rig quickly. She looked down from height, saw manatees in the water below, and later called it a glorious ride. Then there's Arnold Schwarzenegger, and the moment that nearly ended everything. During filming of a sequence on an Air Force Base runway, Schwarzenegger's character had to cling to the outside of a taxiing passenger jet as it prepared for takeoff. There was a last-minute communication breakdown between the stunt team and the pilots. The pilots believed Schwarzenegger had already detached and cleared the plane. He hadn't. The engines roared to full power. The jet surged down the runway, and Schwarzenegger was still in the fuselage, at speeds exceeding 120 miles per hour. He had a fraction of a second to act, had disconnected his safety rope, and tumbled clear of the aircraft just before the forces would have dragged him into the engines or slammed him into the runway. He later described it as one of the scariest moments in an entire career built on dangerous stunts. And that wasn't his only close call on this production. During the horse riding scene, Schwarzenegger's horse was startled and bolted. He managed to slide off, but this happened near a 30-foot drop-off, a few feet in a different direction, and True Lies never gets finished. James Cameron was building the kind of film that simply cannot be made on a green screen stage, and the price tag reflected it. He rented 3 real Marine Harrier jets from the U.S. government. Each hour of flight time ran approximately $2,400 per jet, and the total aerial footage bill hit $100,000. At a time when True Lies became the first film in Hollywood history to carry a $100 million budget, Cameron spent it like every dollar was on screen, because it was. Here is something that almost no one talks about when they praise True Lies for its sharp, perfectly timed humor. James Cameron, the man behind Terminator, Aliens, and The Abyss, read the original screenplay's jokes, decided they weren't good enough, and rewrote every single one himself. Only 2 jokes from the original script made it into the final film. One of them was Schwarzenegger's legendary "You're fired" line, delivered just before launching a missile with a villain strapped to the front. Everything else, the rapid-fire banter, the running gags, the character moments, came from Cameron or was improvised on the day that a big piece of that comedy machinery was Tom Arnold as Harry's sidekick Albert Gibson. Getting Arnold into the film was a fight in itself. Fox executives were deeply reluctant. His very public, very messy divorce from Roseanne Barr had made him tabloid poison, and the studio was nervous. Cameron didn't just advocate for Arnold. He told the studio that if Arnold wasn't cast, he was walking. Cameron went in and told the studio they'd found their third lead after Arnold and Jamie Lee, and that was that. The studio blinked first that Arnold's real-life divorce even made it directly into the film. The line about taking the ice cube trays from the freezer? That wasn't written by any screenwriter. Tom Arnold had joked to Cameron that Roseanne had taken everything in the split, including the ice trays. Cameron heard it and immediately told him to put it in the movie. It became one of the most quoted lines off the entire film. Not everything about True Lies is triumph and legend. There is a darker chapter to this production, one that didn't come to light until years after the film had been celebrated at in 2018. Eliza Dushku, who played Harry and Helen's daughter Dana, came forward with allegations that during filming, when she was just 12 years old, she was sexually molested by the film's stunt coordinator, Joel Kramer. According to her account, after a friend confronted Kramer on set, she suffered a serious injury during a subsequent stunt, thrown by a rig and colliding with a platform, breaking several ribs. While Kramer was responsible for her safety, Schwarzenegger, Curtis, Tom Arnold, and director James Cameron all publicly voiced their support for Dushku's bravery in coming forward. Her revelations forced a long-overdue conversation about the protection of child actors on major Hollywood productions, about who is responsible when a young performer is vulnerable, and whether the industry had been failing them for decades. True Lies didn't just carry the weight of its entertainment legacy after 2018. It carried this too. Here is what the world almost got. True Lies 2, WY March 2001. The script was completed. Jamie Lee Curtis was confirmed to return alongside Schwarzenegger. The story was ready to shoot. Cameron had built on the original spectacular set pieces, and by all accounts it had the potential to be another blockbuster. Then September 11th happened. Cameron's response was direct. Terrorism was no longer something they could treat lightly. Curtis said it even more bluntly, that terrorists had never actually been funny. It was just that a concept had once felt distant enough to satirize. The kind of humor True Lies depended on was simply over. It would never be funny again. One specific scene, a massive, technically complex fight sequence inside a passenger plane as it goes down, had been central to the sequel's action. Cameron felt the airplane sequence, even without any direct connection to the September 11th attacks, was impossible to top it in front of audiences in that moment. The whole project collapsed around that single unavoidable reality. The sequel was discussed as recently as 2005. Cameron was asked about it again in 2009. No plans. Curtis reiterated in 2019. It's done. Schwarzenegger's 2003 election as California governor was cited as an additional reason it never happened. The window closed and it never reopened. Here is where True Lies ends up 30-plus years later. The film grossed $378 million worldwide on a $100 million budget, the first film in Hollywood history to reach that budget threshold, and ranked as the third highest grossing film of 1994. It won Jamie Lee Curtis a Golden Globe for Best Actress in a musical or comedy. It launched the career of Eliza Dushku. It proved that James Cameron, known for hard sci-fi and relentless action, could write a genuinely funny, genuinely warm film about a marriage falling apart and being put back together in the most insane way possible. The storyline inspired films like Mr. and Mrs. Smith and Role Play, and the property now has a television reboot in development. In late 2023 and early 2024, the film was released for the first time in 4K Ultra HD alongside a new documentary, Fear is Not an Option, a look back at True Lies, where Curtis, Cameron, and the cast revisited the production and its legacy in depth. And at the center of all of it, the action, the comedy, the tragedy, the legacy, is that hotel room. A woman in her own underwear, dancing to a song she picked herself, with no choreographer, no rehearsal plan, and a fall that was engineered to make you laugh right when you were holding your breath. Jamie Lee Curtis left nothing to the imagination. Not in terms of what you saw on screen, but in terms of courage, creative ownership, and the sheer audacity to walk into a moment that could have defined or destroyed her, and make it the defining moment of her career instead. That's what a real performance looks like. That if you haven't seen True Lies yet, fix that today. And if you have, you're watching it differently now. Drop in the comments which part of the story genuinely surprised you the most. And if you want more deep dives into the untold stories behind the films that shaped Hollywood, you know what to do.